Well, hello there, good people. Good evening. It is Wednesday, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, and that can only mean one thing and one thing only is time for yet another permaculture talk. We've got a bunch of people in here already tonight, which is awesome, awesome, awesome. I saw Wickshire Project, John Conrad, my cousin up there in Tahlequah, freezing his backside off, and Chicken Johnny, of course. Hi, Chicken Johnny. And already we're talking a little bit about a 30-acre plot that is heavy on the clay side. You're from up in Boston. Are you still in Boston? Or in the Boston area around Massachusetts? And whenever you got heavy soils, going with beds and planting of beds is probably a good way to start out. It gives you something to work with. So composting has been a major issue. Air and material is way too small. I'll bet. I do have a couple ideas on transforming clay that are things that have been used in some other places and other times, and some of them might work for you. And of course, the problem is you got 30 acres and you want to transform as much of it as you possibly can. Obviously, you're not going to be able to do it all overnight. So there are stages and steps and things that can be done. Obviously, importing material would be the quickest way, but it's a lot of space to work with. Let me get over here to our picture, and I'll get started really quick. Holler at me if everything's not showing the way it should. All right, so soil, it's that stuff beneath our feet. We call it Earth, which is what we call our home planet. When it comes to naming things, humans are always very imaginative, but we come by it honestly. The name human itself comes from another name for, well, Earth. I thought it would be kind of funny if you've read the notes. I'm just reading off the notes here. I thought it would be kind of funny if we were to walk up to an alien one day and say, "Hi, I'm a dirt man from Planet Dirt. Pleased to meet you." All right. So the first question is, what in the world is soil? If you travel around the world and you ask 100 different people all around the world what soil is, you're going to get 100 different answers. And they all boil down to more or less that one piece, which is soil is the upper layer of earth consisting of a mixture of organic matter and minerals that together support life. So we'll start at that point. Now, I believe that soil, in order to be called soil properly, has to actually have life in it, not just support life. And in a way, you kind of have to have life in your soil in order to be able to support life. I'll get into that a little bit later. What soil is, we'll start out with the picture that I've got at the top of the screen there. That's potting mix. And often you'll see it on the bag labeled potting soil. It's not, as far as I'm concerned, really a soil. Most potting mix is composed of peat moss and perlite. Perlite is just a puffy volcanic glass. It has no nutrient value at all. It's good at holding moisture. It's good for drainage. Of course, peat moss is good for holding moisture, not so much for drainage. But peat moss doesn't have really any nutrient value either. Now, if they're sterile, this makes a fine medium for starting your cuttings in. As a matter of fact, in the back room right now, I have some cuttings that are rooting in a mixture of peat moss, and I use sand instead of volcanic glass because I'm cheap and I can get sand for next to nothing. As long as it's sterile, cuttings started in the medium have less of a chance of suffering rot from soil microorganisms, which whenever you're growing things is great, but when you're trying to start cuttings or start seeds can sometimes impede your progress, especially if the seeds are really old. All right, soils themselves though. Highly academic folks are going to tell you about 12 different types of soil. I'm not going to get into them. We've got everything from andisols, which are volcanically formed, all the way to vertisols, which are clay, which expands whenever you get a lot of water in it. Feel free to look up all this stuff on your own free time. It's complicated. I don't want to get into it because for most people's purposes, we don't have to get that complicated. We'll talk about 5 different types of soil. That's defined by what they mostly are. And if it's mostly sand, mostly clay, mostly silt, mostly loam, or mostly muck, that describes just about every kind of soil most of us are dealing with. most of us. And we'll get into what those soil types are and talk about those. Let's zoom on down here to that picture right there. And I'm going to jump over here to StreamYard and have a look at comments real quick. Hello, Carl's off the grid. And JIGS27. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to try to pronounce that. Hi there. I don't think I've seen you in here before. Of course, Chicken Johnny, if you guys know, is pretty keen on soils and knowing quite a bit about soils. Actually, he's fun to talk to. I would recommend watching his videos on soils. I'll tell you a little bit more, fill in some of the blanks. I'll skip stuff, miss stuff, overlook things, not think about something. So really, it's a good idea to look at as many different sources as possible. Chicken Johnny, of course, is one of them. There is a fellow by the name of Diego Footer. I don't have him in my featured channels. Green Greg's has him in his featured channels, and of course, I've got Green Greg's in my featured channels. So you'll find him eventually if you follow that set of links to different people that are interested in the topic. Diego Footer started a brand new channel called In Search of Soil, which is a series of podcasts that he put up on YouTube. And he's going and he's talking to some of the heavy hitters in soil science. He's talking to what's her name? Dr. Elaine Ingham, Irene Ingham. I'm having a brain fart at the moment. That's the lady that deals heavily in soil microbiology. So she'll break out the microscope and show you what's going on at 400 times magnification in the soil. I would love to have a microscope that has at least 400 times magnification, because I'd love to be able to look at that stuff and go, okay, yeah, there's the bacteria that's going up there. It's eating a piece of organic matter. There's a protozoa chasing it down. It's consuming the bacteria. Whenever it excretes what it excretes, that's going to be a water-soluble form of nutrient that the plants can absorb. And that's cool stuff. Oh, yeah. Potassium nitrate with... Actually, I'm using wood chips in urine. Last year, I didn't record it on camera, but I made, no, it wasn't last year, it was year before last. I made potassium nitrate with hay in urine, and I discovered that I had just a tiny little bit of black dirt. But oh my goodness, it was the blackest dirt I'd ever seen. It was wonderful. Great stuff. And I figured, hey, if it works that well with hay, what would happen if I use something that already has some other nutrients in it? So I started with some green waste, and I started making some compost using urine and wood chips, and that's what the current project is. That will be done right around June. And yeah, very awesome science. Very, very awesome science. So I mentioned, of course, Chicken Johnny, Diego Footer, Irene or Elaine Ingham. I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but she'll be in the In Search of Soil podcast. There's a fellow by the name of Matt Powers that's doing a lot of research into soil right now. He has a funny laugh. He's a strange duck, but very, very interesting to listen to, because he's getting really heavily into soil science research, and he has a web education series that Elaine. Okay, thank you, Chicken Johnny. He's got a web education series that is kicking off tomorrow. Believe around 9 o'clock Central. I could be wrong. If you check out Matt Powers' channel, he's got links to that web series. Yes, it's not hard, John. It's not hard for my brain to fart at all. He's got links to that web series that he's starting up tomorrow, and I don't know if all of it is going to be for pay or for free, but the first one at the very least is for free. So I'm planning on going and checking that out tomorrow, and maybe some of you can go up there and see what's going on too. He's kind of bringing out the idea of using PSAs, which is plant sap analysis tests, instead of the standard NPK organic matter pH test that you might get where you test the soil itself. The PSA test is on the sap in the plants after the plants have grown in the soil. I'm not sure how I feel about doing that, because I think it's really going to vary on the plant and the type of plant too, how much will get into the plant. So maybe do both. See what it looks like once it gets into the plant, and see what you've got to work with before. And of course, we'll get into some of those numbers and what they mean in a minute here. Workstar Project says, embarrassed to admit, don't be embarrassed. I've urinated on the compost pile too. It's a good way. It's a good way to kickstart things because, all right, some of the back and forth discussion that I have in the how to make potassium nitrate videos, and they are a little bit hokey, but so occasionally I'll get involved in some conversation with people that are watching them and have some more questions or comments about them. And I think it was earlier today, there was a fellow in Canada that's doing hydroponics. And of course, he can't use the urea fertilizer that you can get really cheap up there in a hydroponic system. And the only other alternative is to buy rather expensive chemicals. And he was interested in finding a way to get potassium nitrate, but you can't buy potassium nitrate in Canada either. So this particular project, I mean, some people are watching it and thinking, ooh, he's going to show us how to make black powder. No, I'm not going to show you how to make black powder. Your dad should have showed you how to make black powder already. I'm showing you how to get potassium nitrate. And so we broke down the concentration of urea that is actually in urine, which is 9.3 grams per liter. So if you had the urea fertilizer and you knew what the concentration of urea was in the fertilizer, you could mix it up to be at the same concentration or higher concentration than urine, and then have a very controlled breakdown of urea to ammonia back to nitrate. And then you could leach that out and use that for a hydroponic system, which is kind of cool. Sold what? Old soda pop. Oh yeah, sugar. Well, yeah. Very close to the end of the production, I'll be talking about feeding your soil microbes, and of course you can do that with soda pop. Let me jump back over here to the picture and read what we got here. This, of course, is a picture of sand. And sand is a product of weathering rocks. It's composed mostly of silicon dioxide and is carried down to the oceans by rivers, which tend to drop off a good deal of it on their banks and the bottoms along the way. Now, sandy soil is wonderful. I know people don't like having sandy soil, but it is wonderful because it's loose enough to allow the roots in the water to penetrate into it easily. It drains readily, but sand is also terrible because it has very little mineral value. Silicon dioxide doesn't really break down beyond sand much to anything that your plants can use, and it doesn't hold on to those minerals or nutrients very well at all. They have a tendency to percolate right down to the lower levels into the subsoil, which we'll get into also in a minute. So your plants don't have that close to the roots for very long. It's mostly glass, really, when it comes down to it. The next picture we've got here, moving on down, is clay. Of course, that's clay, and we used to call this puzzle mud when I was a kid. We go out after it had rained and after the surface of the soil had dried up, and of course it starts to break up into these little chunks with the edges curling up, and we call that puzzle mud. There's a little sample there where it's curling up. And clay, of course, is produced by weathering of rocks, usually chemical weathering of rocks, either acid or alkaline. And it doesn't necessarily have to be acid rain falling on rocks, although acidic rain can cause rocks to weather and produce clay. But usually it's from the action of things like lichens, fungi. A lichen is a combination of fungi and a bacteria. If you look at a lichen, you notice it has that little greenish tint to it. What's gone on is two different types or more types of fungi have formed a symbiosis along with a bacteria, a plant form of bacteria that contains chlorophyll. And the bacteria with the chlorophyll produces sugars by taking sunlight and carbon dioxide and water and feeds that to the fungi, which are busy working at breaking down the rock substrate below them and feeding that in the form of minerals back into the algae or the single-celled plant life there, which is really kind of cool. And I don't think they knew about that when I was in grade school. So we just thought lichens were, they're this weird thing that's sort of kind of like a plant, but we don't know much about it. Well, we know a lot more about them now, and they're really fascinating. All different kinds. Some of them are edible. And I really don't know enough about lichens to go on about them at length. It's just an area that I haven't done a whole lot of research into, other than knowing that that's kind of what's happening in the world of lichens, actually sitting there on the rocks, breaking them down. Of course, plants and plant roots also work on weathering rocks by exuding substances from the roots that are capable of dissolving rock over time. All right, so clay particles are very fine. They have the ability to form close bonds with water, becoming hydrates of silica in combination with the assortment of other minerals that are there. And those minerals are important to growing healthy plants, depending upon the parent rock, of course. Clay soil is great to have because of those minerals that are in it. So if you have lots of clay, don't despair. You've got mineral-rich soil. And in a lot of cases, clay soil is high in calcium as well. Plants need calcium to build strong cell walls. So you've got a couple of good things going for you when you already have clay to work with. Clay retains water really well. It'll hold up to nearly twice its own weight in water. But at the same time, clay soil, if it's predominant clay, is terrible because the particles are so fine that they squeeze really tightly together. And that stops water from being able to penetrate through it and drain away easily. Roots have a harder time infiltrating into tight clay, and that makes it slow to drain. The roots don't get to spread out and develop well. So clay soil is both good and bad. There are good and bad aspects to most of these here. I didn't have a good picture for silt, so I just showed a muddy river here. And let me back up and see what's going on in chat here. Would sand be considered, okay, which our project is saying, would sand be considered glass, like mostly non-porous? Well, yeah, sand is silicon dioxide is the bulk of what sand is. There are little bits and pieces of other things that wind up in your sand as well as just silicon dioxide, but most of it is silicon dioxide. Quartzite is the mother of all sand. And other than the minor impurities in it that give it different colorations, it's mostly silicon dioxide, which is what you get glass out of. It's non-porous. The only time you get porous glass is whenever it is produced in tectonic activity inside of a lava pipe. If you have molten silicon dioxide, it can be shot through with gases that puff it up. That's what perlite is in all actuality. It's volcanic glass that's been aerated in the process of its creation. So Wickshire Project is saying clay is what's under about 2 to 4 inches of its soil, mostly all over the Shire here. And what is under the clay might be an interesting question to find out. And of course, we'll get into some of that stuff here in a minute too. So it's 2:14 in the morning. Wow, yeah. Just come back and watch the replay. And I'm starting up doing something here in the next week or two where I'll take the more interesting bits and pieces of these live streams, and I'll do a second edit on them and kind of compress them a little bit, and that might make some of the information good and quick to get through instead of going for the hour or two that most of these take. Okay, so you have calcium lime deposits forming on the coffee pot. Okay, so yeah, you've got a lot of minerals in the water. And of course, those come from the parent rock and the substratum. Yep. Question: if you take some of that hard material that's down there and you put it in water and soak it for about 24 hours, does it get soft enough that you could cut it with a spade? That's most likely some kind of sedimentary rock. But a lot of that stuff in substratum is already well on its way to becoming clay or sand or silt. Of course, that's silt that we've got in the picture there. And this is a picture of a muddy river. Silt, of course, is the product of rivers. It's mixed weathered quartz and feldspar or igneous rock together. So you've got bits of sand, you've got bits of clay that have come together to form that silt. Particles are more coarse than clay, but they're finer than sand, and they have a combination of both silicon dioxide and clay particles in there. It's just coarse clay and very fine sand, and that has a tendency to stay in suspension in water a bit better. Particularly the coarse clay, because of clay's affinity for water, its ability to form bonds with water. So rivers deposit plenty of this material on their banks and on their bottoms, and you can usually find it resting on top of sand owing to its lighter weight. In actuality, silt has a specific gravity on the average about 2.65. Sand has a specific gravity of about 2.65. And well, we'll get to that here in a minute, a bit more as well. But typically, that action of water to form bonds with the silica hydrate part of the silt causes that to remain in suspension just a little bit longer than sand, even though they have close to the same specific gravity. So sand will fall to the bottom first, then the silt comes down on top of it. Well, silt's great to have because it drains better than clay, although, yeah, not as well as sand does. And it does have some minerals in it because, once again, it's a combination of that fine sand and coarse clay together. So it has the minerals of clay and it has some of the drainage capabilities of sand. But silt's not really great because it doesn't store nutrients very well. Your finer, even finer particles, which are decomposed organic matter, will percolate all the way down through the silt layer fairly quickly. If you have lots of silt, you may have noticed that it doesn't seem to matter how much organic matter you throw on top. Within a short amount of time, it's gone, which is no fun. The next picture I've got coming up here, I couldn't find a really good picture of loam, but this is actually, in some ways, a great picture because of what loam really is. Loam is a soil that has a fairly even distribution of sand, clay, and silt, so all three of them together. So best of all three worlds. And this picture actually has one other component that that I'm going to mention more about later on, which is, of course, rocks. And that all has to do with the capability of your soil to drain well. Now, most loams are going to be a little on the silty side, a little on the sandy side, or a little bit on the clay side. So they have a tendency to be more one way or the other. All right. So loam's great to have because it retains moisture well on account of the clay, but it drains adequately, usually, unless it's a little bit more to the clay side. It's loose enough to permit roots and water to infiltrate reasonably well, but has enough density to hold on to minerals and organic matter. So it's got the best of all three. Although loam is not terrible, it can be often improved, and we'll explore some options for improving loam a little bit later. And then I've got one more picture of soil types of the 5. And this one here is this muddy track through a forest. And it's probably some kind of clay underneath, more than likely. But everything on the surface here is this nice, thick, or decomposed organic matter, mostly organic matter decomposed on the surface, and we call this muck. If it's mostly organic matter, it's a muck soil. And muck soils are primarily composed of organic matter that's been decomposed. It can be animal manures, it could be vegetation, it could be both. And muck soils are great to have because they retain moisture really, really well, about as well as clay does. They feed the fungal and microbial life necessary to promote healthy plant growth and supply one of the most important macronutrients, nitrogen, at a ratio of about 10:1. If you've got decomposed organic matter, muck, then you've got about a 10:1 ratio of nitrogen, which is great. It's not all free nitrogen. Usually at any given time, about 98% of that nitrogen is not in an available form to your plants. It takes the action of microbes to convert that into a nitrate that can be taken in solubly through the root system of the plant. And I'll tell you how that works in a minute too. So usually at any given time, about 2, maybe 3% of the nitrogen in your soil is in a form that your plants can take up, unless, of course, you're adding an artificially created nitrate fertilizer, like a calcium nitrate, which is actually made by taking limestone and dissolving it with nitric acid. Sounds a little bit spooky, but if they figured out how to do it safely, then okay. Muck soils are terrible. They really are. They're horrible because they tend to be mineral poor, for one. They drain very poorly, and they resist oxygenation. And your plant roots need oxygen. Your microbes in the soil need oxygen also. So on the one hand, lots of organic matter, hooray, but not hooray because your plants can actually suffocate at the root level in a muck soil. All right, so before I get too much further, I want to talk a little bit about how soils are formed, and also take a look at 3 more very broad categories, which are in situ, alluvial, and moraine soils. In situ is Latin. It sounds fancy. It just means in place. The soil is formed right where you found it. This is where exposed rock is weathered, producing sand, silt, and clay. Pioneer species like grasses and small trees begin the process of further breaking up the rock, laying down organic matter. This is the sort of soil that you're going to find on mountaintops and on exposed plateaus, eroded plateaus. You'll find lots of in situ soil that was made right there on the spot. Usually this is high in clay, usually, because your sand and silt have a tendency to wash off of that and wash downhill. And that's, of course, where we get to alluvial soil, which is formed by those particles being washed and carried downhill towards the oceans by the water, settling out as the rivers rise and fall into deposits, pockets of mixed layers of sand and clay and silt, and sand and clay and silt. Then, of course, we've got moraine soils, and you're only going to find these in the northern part of the temperate zones, from northern temperate to cold temperate, and all the way up into the Arctic and Antarctic regions. So just those portions at the end of the poles. This is where the glaciers have come down. They've ground up everything in their path and mixed it all together. So you've got boulders, you've got sand, you've got silt, you've got clay, you've got chunks of trees, and everything else in between. And then whenever the glaciers retreat, they drop everything right where it is. So everything is just mixed up in a jumble. And the next picture I'll come down to here and show you. This is a picture of the horizons of soil, or layers or horizons, depending upon your terminology. If you ever hear me talking about the soil surface horizon, we're talking about this layer here, surface soil, so on and so forth. Most of the time, this is the part that we're really concerned with. Plant roots, most of them are going to be found in this area. Some do go deeper, but most of your plant roots are right here. This is where most of your mineral and nutrient uptake occurs. Let me jump back over to StreamYard real quick. Hello, Robert at Homestead Aquarius. Thanks for the thumbs up. Hey, we've got Rusty and Rachel with Robertson's Belly Acres. Of course, we've got Amy at Craze Family Homestead in here. Primal Cajun. Hey, wow, all the cool folks are in here tonight. Okay. And Wickshire Project was asking earlier, will silt contain organic material? Yes, sometimes. It's likely to contain some organic material, but it doesn't hold on to it very well. As organic material decomposes and breaks down and becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and finer particles, those will wind up settling out of that upper layer and they'll go bye-bye. So a little bit, but usually not a lot. Silty soils can have, on the average, anywhere from 1 to 2, maybe even 3%, but it's really, really hard to build up organic matter in a silty soil. All right. Primal Cajun. Amy has to go to the principal's office because she's late. No tardy slip. Mostly loam there. Loam is great. You can improve on it, but it's a great place to start if you have loam. It's a lot easier than whenever you start out with sand or clay. Chicken Johnny says muck, actually a scientific term. It is. It is. Let's see here. 12 degrees, having a heat wave. Well, Chicken Johnny is further north than I am here. I'm in northeastern Oklahoma, where incidentally, yesterday, the 4 inches of snow that was on top of my truck melted off most of the way, but I woke up this morning and found that I had another 5 on top of it. So the areas that are out there in deep drifts are pretty thick by now, because we had 2 or 3 the first day and then another 4 or 5 the second day, and now we've got another 3 or 4 on top of that. So yeah, we're getting some drifts building up, which we haven't had a lot of in recent years, but it happens. When I was a kid, we had deep snow drifts all the time, every year. So Robert says, Belly Acres, you're saying you think you have a spring between the house and shed, the driveway is a swamp, or it doesn't drain well, one of the two. Hoping to have pigs in the future. Future garden area is going to be helpful. No, we have to begin with building ourselves. Amen. There's Darren at Down Under Farm and Forge. Okay, I will get to Epsom salt in a minute. That's magnesium sulfate. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about magnesium sulfate. All right. Suffering through 84 degrees. Yeah. Southern hemisphere. Gotta love it. All right. So, due to the relative mass of soil particles, I'm sorry, I'm going to get a little bit technical for a minute. They will eventually stratify. That's not the same thing as stratifying whenever you're taking your seeds and throwing them in the icebox. I'm talking about forming layers, forming strata. The lightest layers will be on top, and even moraine soils eventually, over enough time, will wind up stratifying. Another term for these soil layers is, of course, the horizon of soil. I already mentioned that. I do occasionally talk about something being at or below or in the soil horizon. That's what we're talking about. The first horizon is the organic layer. It's composed of decomposed and partially decomposed organic material. In a healthy ecosystem, nitrogen is tied up here temporarily as decomposition occurs. Your dead plants, animals, and manures will compost in place. But there's no need to be concerned about nitrogen being tied up in the organic layer because the roots of your plants don't grow very much in the organic layer of soil. They prefer to grow down in the soil surface horizon. There is one exception to that rule. The vanilla orchid likes to grow in mulch. It's it's an odd plant. Orchids are all really weird. Um, anyway, so the roots of the plants descend down into the soil surface horizon, and that's where all of your decomposition is, or up here. This is where all your decomposition is taking place. The nutrients migrate down into the soil surface horizon. This is where your roots are, down in this area. Roots of some plants, many plants actually, will extend all the way down into the subsoil. This is this area here, all right, which is the third soil horizon. Some organic matter can be found in this layer, but it's primarily composed of the heavier particles, clay, minerals like iron, calcium, soluble minerals, and once again, some plant roots will extend down into the subsoil area. There are really certain plants that are adept at putting down very deep tap roots to mine the subsoil for minerals that might not be available in the soil surface horizon. Minerals will continue to work down from there at a much slower rate and sometimes enter into the substratum down here, which looks like just a whole bunch of rocks piled on top of each other. And that's really kind of what it is. Rocks, boulders, broken up, weathered rock. Some of that's already started to form into clay or has broken up into sand and silt particles. If this was exposed, of course, that sand and silt would wash off and form some alluvial deposit somewhere, leaving behind clay and rock, which a lot of people have. And of course, underneath that is bedrock. I should go on and say some of your plant roots do even get down into the substratum, but that's usually long-term perennials, trees get down into this point. A lot of the time, this is where your water table is going to be found. If there's going to be a subsurface source of water, it'll be down here. Water tables can extend up into the subsoil area as well. It really depends. There's a fellow by the name of Sean at a nursery called Edible Acres in the Finger Lakes region of New York, and he just has to go down about spade depth and he hits water. That's how high his water table is. Ours here on the banks of the Arkansas River is about 6 to 8 feet below the surface. And at this point, our subsoil is all sand. We'll have about maybe 18 inches of surface soil, and then it's sand, 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 and I don't know how far down the sand goes. I believe when they're putting in the pylons for the highway, they went about 50 feet down before they came to bedrock down here. And bedrock is not entirely free of cracks and crevices either. There will be adventurous roots of trees that get down to that point, working their way into cracks, eventually weathering even bedrock. Yeah, orchids generally organic layer rooted, or sometimes the crazy things will just rely on their fungal connections and grow right on the side of a tree. They're quite a bit different from most most stuff. Okay, rototiller, relieve garden soil in place and just add to it compost material. It really depends upon what you're working with. You said somewhere between 2 and 4 inches of topsoil, and then you hit the clay. And then underneath that, you've got sort of a rotten rock substratum that's fairly easy to break up. Yeah, 50 feet of sand until bedrock, maybe a couple small rocks down there, but it's pretty much all of our substratum is pretty much sand. All of it, most of it, some of it. Yeah, you know what I mean. All right, let me go down here. Find that picture here. Now here's a picture of this is Monument Valley in Utah. This is desert. And I like this picture for a couple of reasons. One is, wow, what a pretty picture, right? And the other end is you can see a lot of things happening in this picture. Of course, you've got basaltic sills here, which are igneous rock that is slowly weathering. And during that weathering process, it's producing clay, sand, and silt. It's washing off of the tops, and you can see from looking at the way these mounds are formed at the base of that, where the alluvial deposit is occurring, right? The sand, silt, and clay. Of course, here up close, we can see it here. And you can also see different layers of strata that have been exposed. If you've got a soil that is like this, in the place where this is occurring, obviously this is a desert, you're going to be working pretty hard to change the situation because you've got a lot of heat. You don't have a lot of moisture. It's a clay surface, which the water doesn't penetrate into very well. And since the water doesn't penetrate into it, it mostly just runs off, washes away the sand and the silt, leaving the clay behind. Doesn't penetrate into the clay much. Your plants don't have a lot of water, which they really need to grow on, so you don't get much plant life. You don't have much plant life. You don't wind up with much organic matter. You don't wind up with much organic matter. You don't wind up with a whole lot of soil microbial life. No soil microbial life, then you can't process those minerals that were in the clay and the silt in order to get some benefit out of them to grow a more uh, diverse landscape. So it's an uphill battle. If you had heavy clay like this, one of the first things that you want to do is stop the water from flowing off, give it the time to actually sink in and infiltrate into the soil so that you can grow some more plant life, so you can develop more organic matter, so you can get more biodiversity in your microbes. That would be one of the first things that you'd want to do. So you'd come along and establish key lines or swales all down this slope, spread the water out, allow it to infiltrate in. That would be one of the ways that you would work on starting to convert this. If you were trying to convert it the long, slow way, which is really what you have to if you're dealing with large spaces. If you just have a garden of this, you can import organic material in. But if you've got, a few hundred acres, you can't just bring in a truckload of manure and go, well, okay, there's some organic material. Of course, once you've got that situation where the sun's baking your clay, the little bit of rain that you have falls down, impacts that, packs those clay particles in tighter, less infiltration happens. The soil gets drier and drier and drier underneath. Any organic material that you get that gets laid down, since there isn't the microbial life to break it down, the only other way that it breaks down is through oxidation. So it just goes up into atmospheric carbon and it's gone. But deserts are like that. Deserts are a place where there's not a whole lot of carbon cycling occurring. Carbon cycling is where you have those organic materials that are broken down by microbiology. Of course, the more carbon you have cycling, the more life there is. Got to have the organic matter on site. So if you're starting from scratch, you start out by establishing catchments, stopping the water from flowing off and carrying all of your finer particles with it, and that will allow you to build up organic matter that will enable you to develop soil microbial life. All right, we'll talk about testing soils for a minute. Now, I mentioned earlier that Matt Powers is doing some more research into and telling us more about PSAs or plant sap analysis, and I don't really know enough about that topic to get into it. So I'll talk about what I do know something about, which is soil tests. A while back, I did a video where I asked the question, what can you really learn from a do-it-yourself home soil test? And my conclusion, whenever it was finally over and done with, was not really as much as I'd like to know. It would give me a very vague idea about whether I had enough nitrogen or enough potassium or enough phosphorus, but it didn't tell me anything about my soil's organic matter. It didn't tell me anything about my soil structure at all. It didn't, well, I could get the pH from the soil. That was about it. So the conclusion was going ahead and getting a professional laboratory tester soil would provide you with that kind of detailed information. If you're just going to be building in ground or building above ground garden beds and building up your soil inside of those, you may not necessarily really be needing a soil test because you're going to be growing in that really controlled environment. But if you are trying to grow or get to the point where you're growing in your own native soil, having a soil test will provide you with some information. And so it can be a little bit boggling whenever you get that sheet of paper and go, okay, what does all this stuff on here mean? Well, most of the results you're going to get are things like your soil organic matter as a percentage, macronutrient levels of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, soil pH, and often other levels of essential minerals like calcium and magnesium. Not every basic test will have calcium and magnesium. A really good basic test will not only have all of that, but also tell you about your sulfur, manganese, copper, iron, boron, zinc. So whenever you're shopping around for a lab to do your test for you, obviously you don't have to take the first lab that happens to be right there. You can look and find one. See if you can find one that the basic test will include more extensive information. I believe University of Delaware and University of Massachusetts have all of that in the basic test. And then most labs will provide additional information for an additional cost. You don't necessarily need all of that additional information unless your specific situation calls for it. Maybe you're dealing with a situation where you know you have a lot of salt in your soil and you want to get a saline analysis as well. Well, you might want to pay for that for extra. Or you're planning on growing a lot of members of the allium family and you want to find out about whether or not you've got enough sulfur to work with. Well, you might pay for that extra bit of the test if your basic test analysis doesn't provide it. Here next to where I live, we have the Oklahoma State University Extension. The lab is actually in Oklahoma City, but there is a guy at the OSU Extension just a few miles from here that I can always go and talk to and go, hey, can you explain this thing to me? and there's actually a living person that can help me out if I have questions. OSU lab charges $10 for the basic test, but they don't provide us with any information about calcium, magnesium, sulfur, magnesium, iron, boron, any of that stuff. For an extra $20, I could get the full slate of all the other trace minerals as well. So $30 and I get the full lab results. And that's about $10 more than the do-it-yourself test cost. So do-it-yourself test gives me a little bit of information, $30, and I know everything a lab can tell me. It's better spending the extra $10, getting the full lab test and having all that information. Then the question becomes, well, what do I do with it? And what does it all mean? We'll start out with organic matter. That's that portion of the soil. Sorry, I'm spraying here. That's the portion of the soil that's composed of once living material that remains of plants and animals. OM is the standard abbreviation that you might see if people are writing it down and don't want to write organic matter 10 times in one paragraph. Organic matter should be higher than 2%, with 5% is good. People consider 5% good. If you add a lot of manure, a lot of compost to your soil on a regular basis, you might wind up with a 5%. But a lot of people that add a lot of manure and compost to their soil are surprised whenever they get the test results back that show that it's much lower, 2 or 3%. They're going, wait a minute. I've been building up this soil and adding a lot of organic matter. What happened? I'll get into that in a minute. High quality organic soils could have organic matter as high as 20%, but one of the reasons you shouldn't be alarmed if you've been adding a lot of manures or a lot of compost is because of how organic matter is calculated at the lab. They take a sample of the soil. You have the sample that you send in. They take a portion of that and they burn away everything that they can and compare the weight before and after. What you lost whenever you burned it up, they count that as the organic matter percentage. And organic matter is less dense per unit of volume than everything else. Remember, whenever your alluvial soil is being laid down, the water flows down, it washes away that organic matter off the top, fine particles that wind up being deposited later on the surface further down or further downstream. All that organic matter is lightweight compared to everything else that's in the soil. So there's another thing, and I'll get to it whenever we talk about soil improvement here in a minute. Macronutrient levels are going to be expressed in ranges from very low or deficient, depending upon how the lab wants to word things, to very high or excessive. Hopefully they'll have a numeric value along with that. I like numbers. I don't necessarily always know what to do with them, but I like being able to see, okay, there's a number, there's a value that's maybe parts per million or a percentage. That gives me something that I can work with. I'm going to add this much in weight per acre or whatever it is I'm working with. Depending upon how the lab presents their information, those words are going to be different. So I'm not going to attempt to get into each and every one of them. That would be a couple of books worth of stuff to try to explain. Generally, nutrient levels in the moderate to optimal range are good, and there's not really any benefit to adding additional nutrients if they're in the moderate or optimal range. If you happen to see nutrient levels in excessive or very high levels, usually that's not going to be harmful to your plants, with a couple of exceptions. If you have a test result that gives you aluminum and manganese, and this is also important, and the pH of your soil is low or acidic, then those metals can reach concentrations that could be toxic to your plants. But if you don't have those conditions, don't worry about it. Usually excessive or very high levels of nutrients is no cause for alarm. All right, soil pH. This is where we're getting a measurement of how acidic or alkaline your soil is. And you may have seen one of these. This is a pH meter. Go ahead and move over here so we can have a look at this. This one's a pH meter. This is a device I've used in a couple of videos before. It has an aluminum rod and a copper rod, and it derives its electrical power that it needs to operate by simply the difference in potential between the aluminum and copper. It uses the soil itself as an electrolyte, which is kind of cool. No batteries required. But this thing can tell you your moisture content, light levels, and pH. But I don't like it because the calibration is not really fantastic on this. I've discovered recently that every time I put it into the soil, I get a measurement of 7 to 7.5. And this is even in areas where I've tried to lower the pH. I'm wondering, why do they keep on getting these high pH readings? And then I put it into some magnesium sulfate solution, which is a little bit on the acidic side, and it went to 7.5. It should have been about a 6.5. So it was at least a one point off. 1 point on the pH scale is 10 times as acidic or basic. So that's not a small amount. Another way of getting your pH is with these things. Show you this. These are pH strips, and you use these by pulling a strip off, like so, and you would mix up a little bit of water with your soil so you get a soft mud, and just touch the strip to that mud and pull it up and compare the color of the strip with the scale. It's right there on the inside of the leaf. And depending upon what your pH is, you'll get a different color that shows on the strip. And you can do it for things like testing how acidic or alkaline your own saliva is. If you're interested in knowing whether your body is alkaline or acidic, there are certain health benefits to having a slightly alkaline body. I am slightly alkaline. We're about around 7.5, which is generally considered to be fairly healthy. Yay. Well, Chicken Johnny was saying I didn't think aluminum was naturally occurring. Aluminum can be found in your soils. It's a natural element. Whenever you have sodium hydroxide, it'll interact with aluminum and create sodium aluminate. So it's part of the oxidation process of, and there are other bases that can interact with aluminum as well. There we go. All right. A lot of clays have a large amount of aluminum in them, in trace amounts, but the aluminum is locked up because of the naturally basic tendency of clay. All right. So Wichita Project, this says this, okay, no microenvironment. This place is in the desert, very devoid of grazing animals to help enrich it. So I would ask, do you have a source of water or are you relying on rain? We'll start with that. Source of water for irrigation, or is it just whatever you can get in the way of rain? Yeah. Yeah, especially, okay, Wichita Project is working on a co-op with 30 acres. So it's not like you can just, go back the pickup truck full of mulch and dump it and go, okay, well, we got our organic matter. A lot of, okay, Chicken Giant saying you get the cation exchange rate. A lot of soil tests will give you the lab test will give you the ion exchange rate. Okay. Okay. Rate test will give you available VS, available versus unavailable NPK. Right. Typically the pH level. Oh, I was getting ready to talk about pH level. pH level will determine how well your minerals can be taken up. Water penetration testing. Yeah, I'll talk about perk test here in a minute. Let's see here. The fluffy life. That's what makes hydroponics cool to me, controlling every aspect of your nutrients. That's a certain advantage to growing in hydro is everything that's going on. Of course, the disadvantage to hydro is it can get really expensive and you can't grow a lot unless you've got a lot of space for hydro and lights and everything else. If you want to be able to just drop seeds in the ground and have stuff sprout up and grow for you, that's an entirely different method of growing. Yeah, inputs. Sassafras is right. It's expensive on the front end. Okay. Can it concentrate in the plant's edibles itself? Well, yeah, but you'd have to have a very acidic pH to begin with. I'll get back to pH in a minute whenever I get done with comments. That's actually the next thing up. Can't change patterns of thinking until we brainwash everyone. Yeah, that's right. Fluffy life. I am going to be talking about adjusting pH in soil in just a minute. You can with cover crops. Conrad is asking, when is the best time to seed clover in pasture? Now. Now. just before spring breaks is a great time. You can wait until spring, but since the seed is going to want to germinate at a cooler temperature than a lot of other things, it's best to get a jump on it and get it there before it starts warming up. Okay, where are we at? We're talking about testing soils. All right, so there's soil pH right there. We're going to talk about that. All right, soil pH is a measurement of how acidic or alkaline your soil is. Score of 7 is neutral. The higher the score is, the more basic or more alkaline it is. The lower the score is, the more acidic the soil is. People refer to alkaline soil as sweet and acidic soil as sour soil. Each point of the scale is an increment of 10 times the level of alkalinity or acidity, depending upon which way you're going. The ability of plants to uptake nutrients is affected by soil pH. So most of the nutrients are going to be readily absorbed at a range between 6 and 7. 6.5 is right about the sweet spot. No pun intended, although 6.5 is slightly acidic. No doubt you probably heard that ericaceous plants like your heathers, your blueberries, and cranberries like to have an acidic soil. And they do. 5.5 is a fairly common goal for blueberry plants, but they can probably make do with the right soil microbiology at a higher pH. So 6 might be just fine for your blueberries. And as a matter of fact, I believe John, if he's still in here, has a guy that he used to work for that his soil was testing at an 8, which is way alkaline, and had no problem growing his blueberries with a soil pH of 8. So they may enjoy a more acidic pH, but they can manage a sweeter soil. And lowering soil pH below 5.5 may not be a good idea, especially if your soil has an excess of aluminum or manganese. So take that in mind. I've got a little picture here of somebody squeezing dirt. You may have heard me talking about this before. Because not all soil testing needs to be done in a laboratory. There's quite a few different tests that you can do yourself with some basic equipment. Namely, you want to wait until a day that comes around. The soil temperature is about 55 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 10 degrees Celsius for you people that use the metric system. You want the soil to be moist but not wet. And you want to bring along some pH test strips like this, a shovel, 5-gallon bucket full of water, maybe 2 5-gallon buckets full of water. You'll want at least a 1-gallon clear glass jar and a tarp. And if you're fortunate enough to have one, a microscope. But it's not an absolute necessity for the test I'm going to be talking about here. We'll start out by digging a hole about a foot across, and foot wide, foot across, foot deep. So 1 cubic foot of dirt up out of the hole onto the tarp. While you've got that dirt on the soil, take your 5-gallon bucket full of water, pour it into the hole that you just made, and let it just start to drain. And while that's going on, we can do the rest of the test. First one is you grab a handful of that dirt and you give it a good squeeze. And you want to squeeze it hard enough to make it stick together whenever you relax your grip. And if the soil won't form a ball whenever you squeeze it, no matter how hard you squeeze it, then you're talking about sandy soil here. That's pretty much the definition of a sandy soil. Assuming that it's moist, not dry. So it should stick together at least a little bit. Okay. Now, whenever you've got a ball, if you give it a pinch and it crumbles apart, then congratulations, you've got loam. If you give it a pinch and it doesn't crumble apart, it kind of smears around and lets you press it and mold it kind of like clay, well, that means you've got a clay soil. That's a very simple test regarding texture. Got a couple other suggestions on really simple basic tests, but would you like to see a brief demonstration? I actually I actually came prepared. Let me grab a couple things here. Oh yeah. I've got a microphone here that I can clip to my shirt that Tim sent to me. Go Ridge Life. And turn it on. This is a wireless microphone. There you go. All right. So I've got my wireless microphone paired. Let's stick that back here. So John says you can answer that question now and May 1st. So yeah, it's whenever you hear people talking about plant such and such, whenever the ground can be worked, they're talking about that point where you can actually walk out and get a handful of dirt and squeeze it. And if you can do that, then the ground can be worked. But if it's still frozen solid, then you can't work it. Sassafras Red said it would be worthwhile to bring up soil from a wild blueberry patch and add it to my domestic patch. I would think so, yes, and I'll explain exactly why to everybody. You probably already know the reason, but I'll get into that here in a minute. Simply Jan Homestead's here. Hello, Simply Jan. Hi, Jan. Hi, Jan. The loose faucet. All right. So Robert says he buries pine holes and needles and small branches in the hole below blueberries. It works very well. Yeah. Decomposing pine cuts. Decomposing organic matter is one of the ways that you can increase the acidity of soil. One of the ways. All right. Let's go to a different camera view. Let me find this here. And a different microphone. Let's check and make sure this microphone is working. Check, 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 check. Can everybody hear that? I'm switching the microphone now. So do you hear that okay? I like alfalfa for fertilizer, Jim. I like it a lot. But I'm going to wait here until the snow is off the ground to do the video on that. I actually do have a full video that I'm going to be doing on alfalfa as fertilizer. All right, we'll switch over to the other camera really quick. The sound is lower. Okay, I can fix that. Hang on just a second here. You're supposed to let me talk about chop and drop alfalfa. All right, is that better? Hopefully that's a little bit better. I'm going to head back into the back room real quick. So we'll check and make sure that the microphone works all the way back there. Walking towards the back room. Still walking to the back room. Walking to the back room. Hello, everybody. Go double check and make sure that everybody was able to hear. So if you can hear me fine while I'm back here, just say yo, and I'll double check and make sure we got sound. This is the first time I've tried getting the camera so far removed from the computer. All right, so is everybody able to hear? I'm good. All right, well, here we go. Now, you may be familiar with this area back here already because I've shown it in a video or two. This is my little seedling start propagation area. And I showed you these guys the other day. Of course, source of water being available here is drawing the bugs in like crazy. You're just going to love it. But I already took some of the slips off my sweet potatoes. Now, I guess what I probably want to ask you, which would you guys rather see next? I've got a couple of videos already shot and in the can and ready to go. I've got the next step in propagating sweet potatoes where I take cuttings and propagate from cuttings as well. And I've got one where I'm starting some hard to start seeds. Well, not hard, but a little bit harder than normal hard to start seeds, which are red buds.
red bud seeds. So I've got those two different videos already ready to go. I'm going to put one of them up on Friday. Just guys, let me know what your preference is. All right, where am I at? Where am I at? This is the sorry excuse for all-purpose potting soil that that you can get around here, and it is mostly sand and clay. And whenever you have mostly sand and clay, it becomes a brick. And if you got soil like this, well, you got issues. Hopefully you don't, but there's ways to fix it. All right, let me jump over here. Oy, this is an example, oh boy, of soil mix that I'm making to put my plants in once they're done germinating. While they're germinating, see, I've got an example. While they're germinating them in this stuff here, which is a mixture of about 50% peat moss and 50% sand. No nutritional value at all. It just holds moisture reasonably well and drains reasonably well and is mostly sterile, except for now I've got whatever bacteria on my hands is in there. Okay. This stuff, if you can see it all right, this is some that I've mixed up, and I started with that really cruddy brick stuff, the sand and clay. And then I added to that some organic matter, and I added a little bit of pelletized gypsum, which helps to soften and loosen clay up. And I added a little bit of mycorrhizal bacteria inoculant. And I added a little bit of organic matter that still has some active mycelium in it for Kingstropharia mushrooms, which is a white rotting mushroom. I use that to make compost out of wood chips. All right. So at a reasonable level of moisture, and actually this stuff is a little bit dry, so I'll take down at the bottom. At a reasonable level of moisture, you should be able to take a handful and give it a good squeeze. Oh, I added one more thing to it. Should I tell you? We'll keep it a secret. About 5% of this is biochar. Organic fertilizer off in the backyard, and then inoculated. See a little bit more about it. I'll do that in a minute. So, okay, great. Look what happens. It just crumbles apart whenever you pinch it. That's the kind of texture you're looking for. Even so, this could be a little better. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to get the other materials I was looking for. Rocks. kind of like the rock that I showed you earlier. I've got a few. These are a little bit on the big side. Not necessarily all rocks this big, but maybe some pea gravel would be good. And I'm going to go ahead and head into the other room real quick with my dirty hand. Why? I want to add some rocks to my soil mixture. All right, let's get back over here to my camera. Switch back to the webcam. Hello again. And let's use my microphone.
There we go. All right, we should be back. Uh-oh. Oh, did the mic break up? Okay, yeah, I'm not really sure what the effective range is on that mic. I guess when I watch the replay, I'll see where it started to mess up. Turn this thing off before I run the batteries down. They don't have much charging to begin with. All right, you got about 80% of it. All right. Well, if you guys are following along on the website, then you've got, yeah. Well, there were two different walls with some electrical wiring and stuff in between here and there. Just kind of try to find out what my range is. I might need to get a more powerful wireless. Terran says, I need to pretend I work for a living. I'll catch you later. All right, bye, Darren. I thought you did. I thought you did work for a living. Eventually, I would like to be able to just have a camera stationed at different places around here and walk around with the mic on and just switch from one view to the next. That might be fun. Okay. Sasspress Red saying, can I intercrop cover crop with corn? Yes, you can. Yes, you definitely can, especially something like clover. Who was it? University of Michigan, I believe, has a pretty good study on that. They started with a cover crop of clover, and they used Trifolium repens, which is a Dutch white clover, as the cover crop, perennial clover. And then they came through and top killed the clover at the places where they were planning on planting their corn. Yeah, corn is a grass. Clover is a broadleaf. The corn is a grass. I don't like the way they did their top kill. I think they could have done a better job of top killing. Maybe just rolled it with a roller crimp and then maybe ran a flamer across it to finish it. But they used a wet blade, which is not great. But aside from their method of top killing their cover crop, whenever they seeded in the corn, they discovered that perennial clover eventually grows in after you've top killed it. It eventually grows in around the base of the corn, but by the time that it does, the corn's already up and out, and it's not a problem. They don't compete with each other, and then the clover just continues to produce nitrogen at the root zone. Yeah, LP torch to clover, exactly. They make a tow behind flamer for your tractor. I mean, if you've got a full size tractor, they make one that you can use to torch your cover crop, so you don't have to till it. And yeah, clover's great because clover is humble. Whenever all the plants are growing in the field, wild and untended by man, and the grazing animals come along, the high and lofty plants are the ones that get nibbled on first, and they get eaten down until the animals have had their fill. And the clover down below prostrates himself humbly and avoids getting eaten. Then, of course, the clover grows a little bit higher, and maybe if he gets too lofty, his tops will get nibbled on. But there's probably some life lessons in clover. All right, I'm done playing with that. All right, so what else is going on here? Okay. Wait, Tim? Tim's here? Zero to Homestead is here. Drops is here. Hi, guys. Fun stuff. All right. Chicken Giant saying you plant alfalfa with oats or wheat. The second year you'll have a good crop. Yeah. Alfalfa is great as a companion because alfalfa is once again a leguminous plant. Forms an association with the rhizobium bacteria at the root level. The bacteria gather in nitrogen from the atmosphere. You've heard this story before. Exchanges it with the plant for sugars and then forms these nodules of nitrates. You cut back the alfalfa, some of the roots die off. Along with the roots, you get the nodules of nitrogen in the soil. Of course, you can use those tops of alfalfa that you cut as a fertilizer, so green manure, and that's another way to feed your plants. It's just by growing a perennial alfalfa, growing a perennial clover. All right. Where were we at? We were talking about simple tests, and I've got that picture there. So there's that squeeze test. If you ever hear of somebody doing a squeeze test or saying whenever soil can be worked, that's what they're talking about. That's the old farmer, soil can be worked. And I said it before, I'll say it again because it just amuses the heck out of me. If you ever go up to somebody, you shake their hand, they've got that really strong handshake, you know that they've got poor quality soil. Thanks, Robert. Robert's got to run. He's got lots of things that he's got to do. He's actually a secret agent, if you didn't know. Oh, sorry, I just added him. Yes, he's a frogman. Everybody wonders about Robert because he never shows his face on camera. All right, so you've got your soil, it's on the tarp. Go ahead and spread it out. And then the next test we're going to do is looking for signs of life. This is just a basic bioassay. This is where having a microscope would come in handy if you had one. But a good quality microscope, one that can get 400 times magnification or better. A good one is not necessarily cheap. You might spend a couple $100 on one. Do you really need to spend a couple $100 on a microscope? Yeah, I'll leave that up to you. I want one personally, but then again, I want a lot of things. I want a mass spectrometer. So have a good look at what's going on with that soil that you spread out. Earthworms are a pretty good indicator of soil organic matter, but you can find other things living in your soil: ants, grub worms, beetles of various sorts. If you've got about 10 or more living organisms that you can see with your eyes in a cubic foot of soil, then you've got an indication that yes, you've got some fairly decent, at least 1 or 2% organic matter in the soil. Of course, a lab test will give you a better number of organic matter in your soil. All right, take a look at the roots of the vegetation if there was any that you dug up. If you're tilling your soil and all you have is bare ground, you've got exposed surface horizon, then you're not going to have any grass roots to look at or any plant roots to look at. But if you can look at those roots and you can see white, hairy fuzz on the roots, so that's a good indication of fungal activity. If you see knobs or nodules on the roots, and the plant that you're looking at is a member of the Fabaceae family, then more good news. Those are rhizobium bacteria. That's colonized the plant. Those nodules have nitrogen in them. Then you're also increasing the nitrogen content of your soil with those plants. If it's not a member of the Fabaceae family and you've got knobs or nodules on the roots, then you've got root nematodes, which, although they are soil life, aren't necessarily good for your plants. So hopefully you don't have those. If you do, there is a way to get rid of them naturally as well. They don't particularly like brassicas. So you can plant some mustards in an area that's had a bad infestation of root nematodes, and within a year or two after planting your brassicas, the nematodes will have either died off or moved on, and then you can go back to building your soil again. Because unfortunately, the brassicas do other things, like interfere with ordinary soil fungus. They are non-mycorrhizal and have a tendency to kill off fungi in the soil. But it's a way to get rid of nematodes without having to treat your soil with some sort of pesticide, which might hurt everything else. All right. If you're interested in seeing a list of plants of the Fabaceae family, there is a list of them in the blog post, The Internet of Trees, about midway through. It's on page 4 of a permaculture designer's quick guide to mycorrhizal associations. Okay, next test is a stratification test. You take that glass jar that I was talking about, the 1 gallon glass jar, preferably as tall as you can get it. And depending upon who you talk to, you'll see if you start looking around for these, you'll see a bunch of examples of this particular test out there. Anywhere from a quarter full to half full. I'd say a quarter full is fine. With soil from the tarp. Put that in there. And then fill it the rest of the way up with water and stir those contents vigorously until you've gotten all your chunks broken up as much as is possible. If you've got a heavy clay soil, you're going to know that you have a heavy clay soil, especially about right now, because it's not going to want to break up and dissolve. And undecomposed organic matter is going to float up to the top, so you can just scoop that out and get rid of it. Well, throw it back on the ground. And then place the jar someplace where you can look at it easily, somewhere around eye level, and where you know that it can remain undisturbed for a few hours. All right. So you remember that part about when we were talking about how alluvial soils are formed, where the water washes everything down and then lays it down in layers, depending upon the specific gravity of those particulates. Obviously, your heavy stuff, rocks, those are going to drop right to the bottom. Sand particles have a tendency to drop really fast too. Sand has a specific gravity of around 2.65. Clay has a specific gravity of 2.7 to 2.8, but clay will stay suspended in the water for a longer time simply because clay has that a tendency to want to form bonds with water. So it'll stay in suspension just a little bit longer. So rocks go down, sand goes down. At the same time the sand is going down, that portion of silt that is silicon dioxide is going to fall out too. Even though there are finer particles than the regular sand, they have the same mass. And if you've done some basic physics, you know that you can take two objects, different masses, and drop them, and they fall at the same rate. Well, they both have the same specific gravity. So they're both going to settle out at about the same time. Obviously, the small particles that are silicon dioxide in your silt are not going to be attracted to the water, so they won't stay in suspension as well. After that, because of the specific gravity of clay being heavier than the specific gravity of the coarser clay and silt, it will settle out, and then your coarse clay silt part will settle out on top of that. Finally, organic matter, if there is any, should settle at the very top of that, and within about 4 hours, you'll be able to look at it, put a strong light behind it so you can see, and you can see the layers that are formed there. Which once again will give you a kind of a rough idea about what the composition of the soil is. Although probably by this time you're going to have a pretty good idea of what kind of soil you've got, just from digging it, trying to dissolve it in the water, squeezing it. You're going to be able to feel the grit if there's a lot of sand, obviously. At this point, have a look at the hole, and if the water is drained, then take your other bucket of water or refill the first bucket and go ahead and fill it up again. And then make a note of what time it is whenever you do that, because you want to come back and check on that hole and see if it can drain within 4 hours. If it takes longer than 4 hours for the hole to drain, then you've got poor drainage and almost certainly have heavy clay soil, unless you've got muck, obviously. Once again, if you've got muck, you'll know it, and if you've got clay, you'll know it by this time as well. Sandy soil is probably going to drain pretty darn quickly. 4 hours is usually enough time to wait before going to check on your jar. Hopefully everything will be out of suspension by then. Sometimes if you've got a lot of silt, it may still be really cloudy until the next day. So that would be another indication that you have a high silt content. Okay. All of that just gives you a rough estimate of what the texture of your soil is. About that time would be a good time to do your pH test. Make a little bit of mud, touch the pH strip to it, compare that to the scale. I've already talked about pH. You want it somewhere between 6 and 7. 6.5 is a sweet spot, and we'll get to adjusting soil pH in a minute too. Let me get back and have a look at some comments here. Got Zero to Homestead. Sassafras Red says, we're lucky to get bales of alfalfa for soap. You're trading soap for alfalfa. That's kind of cool. Yeah, alfalfa gets expensive because you have to be careful whenever you're growing it. And John's right. If you grow your own alfalfa, it's loads cheaper. I've got alfalfa seed. I've got alfalfa seed right here. This is 1 pound of alfalfa seed. This little bag here, 1 pound. This will cover a large area, and I got that for about $5, maybe $6. And if you're buying alfalfa cubes, you can spend $13, $14 and get a 50-pound bag or you can plant your alfalfa and have a lifetime supply. I'm cheap. All right. Amy was even got by even cheaper than I did. She got hers for $4, but I think she went to the feed store and got hers at the feed store. Uh-oh, break up on the mic. Let me check my mic. Right. Audio test, test, test. Is it? Can you hear it okay? It looks okay from here. Oh, okay. I get a little bit off. I was looking too high up in comments. Sharp Project says we all have 400 power microscopes. Amy has one. Okay, cool. What about Shard? Shard's what is that? A silver beet? Let's see. Pretty much all brassicas. I don't know of any brassica. Josh was asking. Okay, yeah, I think I went too far up in comments. I was like, I thought this mic was working. I don't know of any brassicas that don't interfere with mycorrhizal fungi or with nematodes. They all have a tendency to exude chemicals that are nasty to nematodes and disrupt fungi, or at the very least, they don't benefit from having the fungi there. But mustards definitely will work for you. As we're getting rid of nematodes. Okay, we're fine. Yay. Okay, yeah. Amy's saying that she got the alfalfa seed at the local co-op. I thought that's what you told me. All right, so I got a microscope there. I was talking about using the microscope. That's something that Elaine Ingham does. She actually has a few videos on YouTube if you want to go look her up. And of course, she does a lot of Zoom panels with other people like Diego Footer. So she will tell you all about soil microbiology. And I unfortunately don't have a microscope, so I can't just show you pictures of my own here at the moment. All right. So hopefully we've got a soil test from a laboratory. And we know what kind of soil we have because we've gone out, dug it up, squeezed it, looked at it, poked it, pried it, stirred it around in a jar full of water and go, okay, yep, we've got whatever that happens to be. Now we want to see about improving it. My main goal here is to provide adequate drainage, organic matter, soil nutrients to optimize growing conditions for our plants. But the question is where to start. Well, earlier today we were talking about that scene from Monument Valley where you had just clay, rock, and then sand and silt working its way down to the ground. And there are places where you can be in. Obviously, you're going to need to have some water. Hydration is important for everything, really. What are ways that you can improve your hydration? One good way is to add some organic matter. Obviously, establishing catchments, swales, ponds, key lines for water infiltration should be part of the overall strategy. Now we're talking about adding some organic matter. If you're importing it, if you're going to be adding organic matter, and this, of course, is not going to be everybody's situation. If you have to grow it on site, then you're going to be working in an entirely different process than backing a truck up and going, okay, here we go. Here's some organic matter. I figured out a formula for improving organic matter in soil by 1%. So your soil test from the lab has your soil organic matter percentage in it. And you go, well, that's low. I want to raise that. How much do I need to add to raise it by 1%? I'll figure this out. On the average, your soil is about 40 pounds in 1 cubic foot. So for every pound of soil amendment, we can cover 2.5 square feet of surface and increase the soil by 1%, and whatever that happens to be, to a depth of 1 foot. That's about spade depth if you're just using a shovel to turn. If you're double digging, then you're covering 1.25 feet instead of 2.5 feet. Okay. So if you were using the metric system, it's 1 kilogram to 1.5 meters. And whenever I first wrote the blog post, I wasn't thinking about something that occurred to me later on. And what occurred to me later on was I'm lying in bed going, okay, I forgot something. What was it? And, I can't sleep. It was like, oh, yeah, I remember. Finished compost is somewhere between 40 to 60% water. So whenever you're burning it off, obviously they're burning off dry weight. Half of that was water. So if you're adding a pound of organic matter to 2.5 square feet to raise the percentage of organic matter, it's not raising it by 1%. It's raising it by half a percent, because half of what you're adding was water. So it takes 2 pounds of finished compost to provide 1 pound of organic matter total, or 1% over 2.5 square feet. So if you're going from just sand and clay and trying to jack that up with just adding organic matter on top, you have to add a lot of organic matter, a whole lot of organic matter. But at least now you know where you're starting at and what kind of a battle you're dealing with when you're trying to increase that OM percentage. So let's talk about what the ideal soil organic matter is. It's kind of an interesting subject. And I've heard people say that one cannot have too much organic matter. Well, if you have too much organic matter, you've got a muck soil. But most soils can greatly benefit from having more organic matter. The ideal percentage for a good, rich organic soil is about 15 to 20%. If the organic matter content gets too high, you're getting into muck soil territory. And although some plants do enjoy that sort of thing, remember that although organic matter is the champ at retaining moisture, it's terrible at drainage. And we want water to be able to move through the soil. And I'll explain more about that in a minute. If one's doing the initial amendments to their soil and the soil does not already contain a decent amount of charcoal, consider adding up to 10% of charged biochar as an amendment whenever you're adding your organic material, up to 10%. That would be up to half of your organic matter would be biochar. Once you've got it added, you don't have to add more because it will be with you for forever. There are spots in the Amazon where the soil is over 2,000 years old, still produces abundantly. It was deliberately made that way, and the charcoal is still there. There's something else that is in that soil, which might be of interest to Wickshire Project, incidentally. I'll get to that in a minute, too. All right. Let me see here. Advance my picture a little bit. That's charcoal right there. Biochar. Chicken Johnny's going to bed. I found, okay, Conrad Homestead was asking about a good source for clover. If your local feed store or co-op doesn't have any, Nature Seed, I think, is where I got. Yeah, Nature Seed. That's where I got this stuff. I believe they have clover in inoculated and uninoculated form. If you're buying it uninoculated because you already know that the bacteria are in your soil, you can get a whole lot more for a whole lot less money. But if you are starting off from scratch and you know that you've got sand and clay and that's about it, no organic matter to speak of, then you don't have any microbial life in the soil, particularly the rhizobium bacteria. You can buy seed that's already been inoculated, and it comes in little tiny clay balls. You're adding more clay to your soil, but it's not much. It's just enough to hold that bacteria next to the seed, so whenever it gets hydrated, you've got the bacteria ready to go. Okay. DPBs, dumb people bags. Wickshire Project is saying, I lived in Boston. I had the best time collecting everyone's leaves and grass clippings. I got free compost. Yeah, listen about. Yep, people throw their fertility away because remember we were talking about some plants getting their roots all the way down through the subsoil, all the way down into substrate, even getting all the way down to bedrock and all the way down there. They're getting access to minerals that aren't in the soil surface horizon. And whenever plants grow, they are taking in minerals from the soil surface horizon. Exactly how they do it, we'll get to in a minute. Um, they're taking in minerals in the soil surface horizon. So those aren't in the soil surface horizon anymore. And then as time goes on, the minerals that aren't taken up percolate down into lower and lower levels. Percolating down into lower and lower levels, well, the roots for most plants are up here. They're not getting to those. So your perennials, your trees, are pumping those minerals back up and putting them into their leaves, and then dropping the leaves on the surface of the soil. Here, where the organic horizon is, they decompose, get into the soil surface horizon. Boom! Now your plants have minerals. But if you take your leaves and you wad them up and you throw them in a bag and you put them on the curb, then all of the effort that your trees went to try to improve your soil for you just went down the road with a trash truck. Or Bookshare Project's going to go and pick them up for you. If you don't want it, he'll take it. I don't blame him. Take those dumb people bags. Hi, Chris. Sassafras Red was asking, do I inoculate the char with effective microorganisms? EM, if you see somebody referring to something called EM in soil science, they're talking about effective microorganisms. And the answer is yes, absolutely. My biochar started out by soaking it in a liquid organic fertilizer that I made myself in the backyard. If you find the video entitled "Do Not Drink Liquid Fertilizer, Make Your Own Instead," that's how it was made. But after I soaked it, I turned around and made a tea from some soil from the compost heap, the regular compost heap, full of microbes. I supercharged that by adding some extra sugar to it to feed the microbes, let them perk for a little bit, and then added that in, soaked that in. So the biochar is now full of nitrogen from the liquid fertilizer, and also inoculated with microbes as well. Connor at Homestead was saying, does Terra Preta have ceramic parts in it? Yes. Terra Preta has ceramic parts in it. Well, essentially terracotta. I'm getting ready to talk about that in a minute. All right. Yeah, Boca Rich neighborhoods had sick trees. Yep. Sick trees. Because, the trees are doing that work for their own benefit too. Not only for their own growth and benefit, but also to help support the other species that are growing around the tree. All the other things that are growing under the shade of the tree are benefiting from that leaf drop from the tree. So the tree is helping them out. And in turn, those other plants that are growing around the tree are helping the tree out too. It's a community. It's a community effort, guys. All right. Really quick, I'm going to go into drainage. Adding biochar, incidentally, helps with drainage. It'll hold and absorb water to a certain extent, but it also lets water drain through. Let me double check and make sure that, okay, yeah, you can see. All right. So why does soil need to drain? There are a number of reasons why soil would need to drain. Oh my goodness, I'm going long, aren't I? Okay, we're almost done. Well, just like you and I, plants and microorganisms need air to breathe. Without the microorganisms to break down and convert nutrients, I was talking about this earlier in the program. Without those to break down the nutrients into forms that plants can absorb, the plants starve, essentially. You could have all the nutrients there in the soil, but if the plant can't get them, the plant's starving. So water sitting on roots for too long can promote rotting of the roots. And finally, plants can't take in nutrients if water cannot flow readily through the soil. The way a plant moves water through the cells, I think I heard Chicken Johnny talking about this sometime earlier in the week. As a matter of fact, he had a live stream. He was talking about the same thing. I didn't stay and watch the entire thing, but I already knew he was talking about this particular topic. Is the respiration, the passage of water from the leaf of the plant out into the atmosphere. He was getting a little bit technical about how it actually works, but Basically, all you need to know is plants release water vapor from their leaves. Whenever they release the water vapor from their leaves, they create a zone of low pressure within the body of the plant. Low pressure in the body of the plant draws in water from the surrounding area. Now, imagine if you're drinking a milkshake and you got your milkshake, and it's a really thick milkshake. And you got your straw, which is just standard straw in here, in the milkshake, and you're trying to drink your milkshake, but it's too thick. Your thick milkshake won't let anything come up to the straw. Well, that's what happens if you've got too heavy of a soil, too much muck, too much clay. The water doesn't flow readily. So the plants release the water from the leaves, and now it's got that low pressure area, but it's not able to pull the water in from the surrounding area, or at least not enough. Well, that's a problem, because whenever your microorganisms excreted the organic matter that they're breaking down, they made it water soluble, which is how the plant gets its nutrients. All the minerals, all the nutrients that the plant gets come in as water soluble nutrients. That's how they get into the roots. So thick soil, heavy soil, soil that doesn't drain, your plant's sitting there and it could be surrounded by rich resources and unable to enjoy them. All right. So 5 broad categories of soil from earlier. The reason loam is preferable to the other 3 major ones is because of the difference in particle sizes. I mentioned earlier when I was in the back room about wanting to get some pea gravel, but being snowed in, I haven't been able to go get it. Different particle sizes, everything from the fine-sized particle of sand all the way up to very small rocks. This one's about the size of my thumb here, but this one's a little bit large. I wouldn't want to have much larger than that in the soil. Obviously not for seed starting, but for growing plants in, rocks this size aren't bad. As just one of the components, something of a different size, something of a different shape. This causes those parts to not stack together evenly. If they're all the same size, they stack together very evenly, and that makes it harder for water to penetrate. But you have different sized and different shaped particles, all the way from fine ones to big ones. Then you have gaps, and the gaps allow water to infiltrate, allow roots to infiltrate. So diverse particles would be one way that you can improve on a loam. And that picture that I showed actually had the one that I have in there for loam. If you're looking at the show notes, the one I have for loam actually shows some of those small rocks in there. That's a good mix, incidentally. Coarse sand, some small gravel, pea-sized gravel are great for allowing gaps to allow water to flow. And you really want to have water flowing. You don't want it to flow out too fast. You want to retain some, so you need organic matter. Some clay is good for that too. Biochar obviously holds on to moisture as well, but you want it to drain. All right. May as well talk about Terra preta now. Soil of the Amazon, the Terra preta that they found there, very ancient, hundreds if not thousands of years old, and it's found in areas where someone, once upon a time, planted themselves a food forest, and it's still there. The food forest is still there. We don't even really know what civilization it was. They're long gone by now. But the trees that they planted and the support species they planted in these areas are still there, and the soil that they made, because it was made, is still there. Beneficial microorganisms, biochar, and also pottery, clay. Not just clay, but clay that's been fired, so it's hard. And I think one of the reasons why they put that in there is because notice what they don't find in that soil. They don't find rocks. So effectively, they made their own rocks so that they could have a diversity of particle sizes to assist with drainage. Now, if they weren't just brilliant, then they were really lucky to stumble into that, because what a great idea, right? You don't have rocks, make your own. Get your clay, form it into little balls, throw it in the pit with some while you're making your charcoal. Hard fire it. Okay, now you've got your charcoal. You soak your charcoal in your solution with nitrogen and effective microorganisms. Crush it up, mix it in there with your artificially created rocks out of clay. Well, in this case, they just used broken pottery, but you could do exactly the same thing by making little hard fired balls. Mix that in with your soil and you're good to go. Here I was thinking we wanted to remove all the rocks from our soil. And incidentally, do you ever wonder why it is that your soil seems to be growing rocks? It has to do with specific gravity. Remember clay having a specific gravity of 2.7, 2.8 in the small particle size? Well, your rocks, although they may be larger in particle size, a lot of them have a lower specific gravity. So effectively, as time goes on, they wind up working their way to the surface because they're lighter than the clay particles. So your sand, or not your sand, but your soil winds up growing rocks for you. So if you ever wonder why, you're going along and the rocks keep on appearing. That's why. they're migrating to the surface as the other particles settle down. Of course, the soil has been sitting around for too long without enough water or living roots to create and maintain channels for water, nutrients, microbial life, and so forth, all that stuff. The natural settling of particles, which we were just talking about, bringing those rocks to the surface, is going to eventually seal up the spaces within the soil. And that's when it becomes compacted. Usually people go, oh, I need to till, my soil is compacted. Really? Probably not. In most cases, it's not that compacted at all. Well, this is presuming at this point that there is a diversity of particle sizes already, and you also have plenty of organic matter available. Then here's now the time to introduce plants to the system that have a habit of growing those deep taproots to force open pathways and channels into the soil. But if it's gone on for too long, if you've got sun-baked clay and everything's just blech, there are times that you may want to go ahead and engage some radical measures, and that means breaking out the plow, mechanically loosening heavily compact soils with machinery before reintroducing plant species that can maintain a healthy, well-draining soil mixture. But you don't necessarily have to break out the plow every single year. Once you've got a decent ecosystem established, it's a lot easier to maintain. All right, let me back up here. Adam's patch is late. All right, so I just covered the Terra Preta ceramic parts. All right, shredded cardboard. Yeah, I use a lot of cardboard. I try not to show the floor in here in the living room because it's just a jumbled mess. My floor's covered with cardboard. I've run out of places to put it. It's on the floor. I've got a layer of cardboard on the floor. If I'm walking through the house and I happen to spill something, it lands on the cardboard. Okay, that's organic matter. It'll break down later. Whenever spring rolls around, all that's going out there into the garden and onto the yard, and then I'll be layering mulch over the top of it. And cardboard's great. Cardboard is great. It breaks down. The glue attracts earthworms. They love eating it. Okay, Berkshire Project says, Jason, the trees would drop a heavy layer of leaf litter, Boston oaks, etc. Yeah, those trees had a ring on their drip edges. Nothing grew under them. It was a moat of death to preserve their space to grow. Yeah, and that can happen. Not all trees play well with others. Some do, some don't. And grasses and oak trees don't usually get along incredibly well. Unless, of course, you have your trees spaced out enough that enough light can get in to let the grasses grow. And having animals in the mix to come by and do some grazing and manuring helps out as well. But oak trees don't really produce a lot of nitrogen. So if you didn't have a nitrogen producer under the oak tree, then the soil would be deficient. Would fish emulsion assist with this? Yeah. Fish emulsion is awesome stuff. Fish emulsion is awesome stuff for a couple of reasons. If you're getting fish from the ocean, as the water falls, as the rain falls and the water flows, it carries along soluble minerals with it, including lots of phosphorus. Phosphorus winds up in the ocean. So ocean life winds up absorbing that phosphorus that originally started on land. And unless you're willing to wait for the continental plates to subside under each other and carry ocean floor down under, get it turned into magma, or get it turned into molten rock in the mantle, get it turned into magma, be spewed back up out in the form of volcanic ejecta in a couple 100 million years. The only other way to get the phosphorus back out of the ocean is to grab some fish or some kelp, seaweed, whatever, and bring that in and bring that back to land. So I don't know of any animal on Earth that does a better job of that than humans. Bears do it in conjunction with salmon, and wolves do it in conjunction with the salmon to a certain limited extent. But humans can do a wonderful job of recirculating phosphorus from the sea back to land. And we do it naturally because we like to eat fish. It's almost like humans were designed to eat fish and enjoy eating fish because it's good for the health of the planet. See, humans are an important part of the ecosystem. A lot of the time we don't think of ourselves that way. We think, oh no, we're bad for the environment. We're bad for the planet. No, we're great for the planet. We really are. We just have to understand what it is that we're doing and why it works and what it works for. All right. Soft and fluffy, old forest pockets. Ooh. What about lava rocks? Well, what about them? We're talking about igneous rock that's shot through. If we're talking about one thing, a pumice stone, igneous rock that's shot through with lots of little air pockets from whenever the gases were expanding as it came out. Well, that's a lot of spaces that water can be trapped in. Lots of surface area that can provide a home for microorganisms. So lava rocks can be very good, especially if you've got lava rocks that have been broken up to smaller, more manageable size. Something probably a little bit smaller than that. Most lava rock that you get in bags is a bit chunkier. But if you took that and you were to crush it up a little bit and throw that down there, then that will give you something that has some of that nice extra texture, different sizes for drainage, porous so that it can hold on to some water for you. Not bad stuff. And of course, as it weathers, that will produce other minerals for you as well. Chris Sunlightner said, I made David the Good soup one time. You're talking about the fetid swamp water. And oh boy, did it stink. Okay, I'll tell you something about that stuff, man. Let me back up here. Let me find it. All right, so fetid swamp water. And you watch David the Good for this. He does quite a few videos where the fetid swamp water makes an appearance. I did one where I made my own version of it. Wonderful stuff, anaerobic composting in a liquid medium. We'll put it that way. Really, basically, you take a drum, you pack it full of just all the weeds you can find, green weeds, not dead dry stuff, but green stuff. Just cut that with your sickle, throw that in there, chop it up, throw that on in there, put in a little bit of sugar of some sort, maybe throw in a little bit of magnesium sulfate, Epsom salts if you want. Why not a gallon a year and two while you're at it? Sure, why not? Throw that in there, and then top it off the rest of the way with water and cover it, and then walk away. And after a little bit of time, if you get too close to it and you open up the lid, it'll knock you down. It stinks. But within about 2 or 3 months, 6 to 8 weeks or so, you can dip the liquid out of that and use that as a foliar feed on something you're not planning on eating right away. Not on something you're going to eat right away. You don't want to put it on your lettuce just before you harvest your lettuce because anaerobic bacteria are in there. They could make you sick. But after you've put it on there and a couple of days has gone by, the sun's going to kill those off. It's not a problem. If you let that fetid swamp water sit with the lid on it for 2 years, which is what I did, come back in 2 years. And if you watch that video that I did, do not drink liquid fertilizer is the title of the video. If you watch that, that was a barrel that had been sitting for 2 years. And I came back and opened it up and went, it's got a very strong mineral scent to it, a very strong earthy scent to it, but it's not rancid anymore. And then I poured it off and separated out the solids from the liquids, and I had about 15 or 20 gallons of liquid concentrate fertilizer, really good stuff. And then used that to feed the garden with. and then put the solids into the regular compost. There had been a possum in that originally 2 years ago, and there was no trace of the possum, bones and all, gone. Talk about bone meal for organic phosphorus. Plenty of phosphorus in there. Yeah, so after it's been sitting a while, 2 years or so, the odor goes away. 3 years, it's almost gone entirely. And once again, once you pull that out, if you can solarize it, expose it to sunlight, bubble some air through it, maybe get a little bit of forest soil with microbes from the forest in there, toss that in there, feed it some sugar. You switch that over to a liquid with aerobic bacteria in it instead of anaerobic bacteria, and then you've got a really good liquid fertilizer. So yes, Melinda Schneider, lava rocks are good. Cardboard carpet, yes. Okay. So let's see. Deer Isle Hostel use humanure. Yeah, milorganite. You can use humanure. The problem with human manure from large facilities is people flush the worst possible things. So you may wind up with components in that you don't want on your garden. But the bright side is a lot of the toxins, the heavy metals, only become soluble at extremes of pH, either high pH, really alkaline, or low pH, really acidic. And if you're keeping your pH in that sweet spot between 6 and 7, most of them aren't even going to be taken up into the plants because they're not water soluble at that pH. Okay. Let me see. So drops, your soil is mostly basalt. Yeah, you're up there in the Pacific Northwest. Yep. Yeah, dissolve that possum. Actually, if you're watching that particular video, whenever I was making it, I put a rat in each one. So whenever I go open those up and drain them out, there won't even be bones of that rat left. Yep. All right, where are we at here? All right, let's talk about some major disruption, and we've got our little what is this? Test tube here that somebody wrote life on. Because right at the beginning, I was talking about my criteria when I talk about soil and how potting mix and seed starting mix isn't soil. It isn't soil because it doesn't have any life in it. It doesn't have any life, and it doesn't really support life. It's good for a sterile place to start your plants, but beyond that, once they're started, they need life to sustain them, and life needs to be in the soil. Bacteria, protozoa, and fungi, they're all responsible for taking the minerals and nutrients from the soil structure, converting them into forms that can be absorbed by the plants. 5.5 pH is going to be the very lowest, I would say, really, for pH, because beyond that, you run into problems where toxicity from heavy metals could enter into your plants and either be toxic to the plants themselves or toxic to you, to us, if you eat them. Acacias, blueberries, cranberries do not absolutely have to have a really acid soil as long as you have good microbiology in your soil. All right. Now let's talk about adjusting pH for a bit. Whenever you're making adjustments to pH, it's best to add pH up or pH down amendments slowly, a little bit at a time. You can always add more later, but it's a lot more difficult to correct an imbalance if you change your pH too quickly. And this is where we're going to talk about Epsom salts, magnesium sulfate, other things. All right, so lowering pH you can do by adding an organic mulch above the soil horizon, and that will gradually lower pH as the organic matter decomposes. Obviously, Robert was mentioning things like pine cones, pine needles, Alder trees, incidentally, the seed cones on alder trees are very acidic, well, more acidic than average. They're not so acidic that whenever you drop them in your aquarium, it kills the fish, but it will move the pH meter down a bit for you over time, slowly. So things like that are great. But if you want faster results, the common method is to add elemental sulfur. Let's see. I have some. I've got, yeah, some elemental sulfur here. This is, yeah, just regular sulfur, plain sulfur. That's all it is. You can buy it in a fancier container. So, and this one, this is also sulfur. It's been pelletized. Probably can't see that very well. They got little granules of pellets of sulfur. So this breaks down and is released a lot more slowly. And the sulfur itself doesn't do anything. But the bacteria in the soil, if you have bacterially active soil, which you get by making sure that you have organic matter in your soil and water in your soil. So you always start out with making sure you've got a way to hydrate your soil and add organic matter. If you have both organic matter and water in your soil, then you can have the bacteria in your soil, which will take the sulfur and consume it. And they excrete sulfuric acid. So they're actually making sulfuric acid and acidifying the soil whenever you add sulfur to your soil. But they do it slowly, very slowly. Treatment of sulfur could take up to 2 years to be fully processed by the microbes in your soil to lower the pH. Of course, aluminum sulfate and magnesium sulfate can be advertised as means of lowering pH, and they'll lower pH right on the spot. But that leaves the problem of aluminum toxicity if you're using aluminum sulfate. And if you've already got an excess of magnesium in your soil, there isn't really a whole lot of benefit to adding more Epsom salts. You're just changing the pH rapidly. So when in doubt, always alter your pH slowly. If you need to raise pH, this can be accomplished by adding crushed limestone. Don't use garden lime. I mean, garden lime will raise pH quickly, but that's, once again, rapid changes. Rapid change is bad, people. Rapid change is bad. Add crushed limestone. You can use dolomitic limestone if you need some magnesium added to your soil. But if your soil has already got an excess of magnesium, no sense in using dolomitic limestone. Regular crushed limestone will work just fine. The smaller the particle size, the more rapidly the pH will increase. But once again, make several small adjustments and wait for the biome, your soil microbes, to process those changes before you add more. 2 years, up to 2 years is how long it'll take for the microbes in your soil to finish processing everything. Your soil is going to be with you for a long time, so you can afford to be patient. All right. Really quick before I get to the wrap up, because we're almost there. And I come back here and catch up on comments. What did I leave out? Can I switch to large screen when showing things? I can. Did you want to see the that or just here? I'm just waving my hands around. I'm talking with my hands for the most part. Okay, Sassafras said it doesn't release into the air, or is the amount small enough that it doesn't matter? Okay, all right. Let me see here. Adding more links to the chain. The more processes an amendment goes through, the more steps along the line, the more chances you have to recognize a problem and do something about it before it becomes a catastrophe. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about observing the flow of energy on the site. It sounds kind of new age and mystical, but really all we're talking about is there is an energetic exchange whenever anything occurs. things are changing from one state to the other state. There's an energetic exchange. You and I are talking. There's an energetic exchange. A plant takes in carbon dioxide and sunlight. There's an energetic exchange. The leaves fall on the ground and begin to decompose. There's an energetic exchange. All of these exchanges where we're transferring elements from one state to another, to another, to another. These are all steps. The more steps that you can go through, the longer it takes for everything to process through the system, which means more opportunities for you to gain a yield, for one, and more opportunities for you to correct problems. All right. pH plant shock if too fast? Possibly, yes. Well, because there is that lag time between when you add an amendment and when you can actually see the result, then you can wind up creating a toxic environment by trying to speed things up. So yeah, go slow. Crushed dolomite is pH up, yes. Dolomitic limestone is pH up. Dolomitic limestone has magnesium in it as well. So if you have a magnesium deficiency, dolomite is good. But regular crushed limestone will also increase pH. So yeah, if you're doing bioremediation, I didn't include this in my notes, but if you're doing bioremediation, find one spot that's downslope from everything to throw your to throw your bioremediated stuff, so it doesn't keep on circulating. Okay. Yep. Wish our project's saying, Jason, what's your education background on permaculture gardening? You know stuff. I grew up on a farm. I grew up on one of the farms that that my grandfather was one of the guys that was communicating with PA yeomans back in the 40s before he wrote his first book. Some of those techniques were actually developed on my granddad's farm. So, yay! Other than that, I've grown up on the farm and do a lot of research. I'm an autodidact and a polymath. Let me see here. North and South Homestead. Hey, hey. Says Presley should be listening rather than talking to the rest of the class. Nothing wrong with talking to the rest of the class. All right. Well, we're about done here. Let me switch back to my view here. Got my little test tube there. There's been a lot of fuss over fungally dominated systems and bacterial dominated systems, but the truth is a healthy ecosystem really needs both the fungi and the bacteria. Sapotrophic fungi, those are the ones that are called white rotting fungi, are needed to break down the cellulose and lignin in wood. Mycorrhizal fungi will mine for the minerals and facilitate the exchange of minerals and sugars with plants at the root level. And the bacteria and protozoa take the smallest particles of organic matter and digest them and convert them into water-soluble forms that plants can then take up through the root systems. So you need both in all actuality. You can make do without, but you have to be constantly providing soluble minerals and nutrients to your plants if you don't have the bacteria. You have to be moving those materials closer and closer to the root zones if you don't have the fungi. You have to find some way to deal with your cellulose and lignin if you don't have white rotting fungi in your system. So a simple way to import beneficial soil life, and this goes back to that question about getting soil from around wild blueberries and bringing it back. Well, here we go. I told you we get to it. There's a simple way to import beneficial soil life. You just take a few shovelfuls of soil from the healthy forest floor and introduce them to your finished compost. If you're doing a hot compost, you don't want to introduce those microbes while your compost is still in the heat phase, because the thermophilic bacteria are going to make your compost hot and kill off the microbes that you were just trying to impose. It's another reason why you may want to consider doing a cold compost method. It's slower, but you have a more biodiverse finished product. So once your compost is done getting through its heat phase, if you're doing a hot compost, bring in some microbes from outside, either from a compost heap that you've already finished and inoculated, or from the forest. And yes, for in the case of your blueberries that you got from the nursery and brought home, obviously they weren't grown with the mycorrhiza that associate ordinarily with blueberries in the wild. They don't have necessarily the bacteria that you would find in the wild. Getting some wild bacteria, wild mycorrhizal fungi, and bringing them in and introducing them is a great idea, an absolutely great idea. And it doesn't take much. Once you've inoculated with microbes, you want to make sure they stay fed. You can do this a couple of ways. People talk about using molasses in the garden. Well, molasses is great, but the reason molasses was used is because it's a cheap form of sugar, very cheap. It doesn't cost much. Any cheap sugar will work. You can also use starches, so grains like an oatmeal or even cracked corn, which is what I've used. I go in to get the field corn from the branch supply store and just put it into a kettle, cover it with water, and bring it to a boil and make a mush. And once that cools down, I mix that in with the compost to feed the soil microorganisms, and they explode. I mean, not like boom, but the population goes up. And now you've got life-infused compost that you can bring out to the garden, introduce the fungi and microbes to your soil so they can continue to work on your behalf, break down your organic matter, and feed your plants. And that is the end of my show notes. Oh, no. That's it. What else do we need to know? I'm going to try to stay warm and stay sassafras red. It's I think it's about 15 or 16 degrees right now. It's not too bad. All right. Bookshire Project says found the koi and carp breeding once the pH stabilized during the rainy season. Nice. Okay. So you used to care for people's 2,000 gallon up to 1/4 acre ponds. Oh yeah. Paid well for adding stone to filters. Felt guilty, but I could afford Starbucks. If you've got a pond full of fish, that's a resource right there. Just the poop from the fish. Yeah. North and South Homestead says that's probably why I buy 10 blueberry plants a year, and by the end of the year, I'm down to 5 surviving new plants left. Well, if you've got 5 plants that survived, have you considered possibly taking green semi-woody cuttings and starting new plants from cuttings instead of buying more? Because although, yes, I will be selling blueberries before too awful long, man, I'm telling you, once you've got a few plants established, you can just, go ahead and propagate and propagate. Ooh, is Green Greg's getting ready to go live, or has he started live? Has he? I see. Oh, he is live already. Started 6 minutes ago. Okay, guys, we've reached the end of the program. So by all means, yes, hit Green Greg's. Go visit him. I will see you over there. And as always, thank you for tuning in. I hope you found the video informative or entertaining. And if you did, you know what to do. I will catch you next time.